may have heard that I spent a lot of time in nature over the last couple of weeks. It's good to be back with you. It's really great. I wish I could have taken everybody with me, but that would have been a very different trip if you were with me. I was all alone, 10,000 feet for 3 days and 3 nights. No phone, no internet, and I didn't speak with another human being for 3 days. And you know I like to talk, so my companions were the trees. You know, the trees make really good companions when you're all alone. I learned that. And also a black bear, which fortunately just was passing through and did not spend any time. But there were leaping deer and a soaring eagle. I saw an owl, brilliant butterflies, scampering chipmunks. I watched the bees tending to dozens of gorgeous wildflowers that were all throughout the fields around me. And I could hear the wind coming through the trees for, a few moments before I could actually feel the wind on my body. It was such an amazing experience. And sometimes that wind would blow the bugs that were around me, blow them away. I was very thankful for that. But then other times they would blow a new swarm of bugs into my orbit. But being in a very Buddhist mood while I was out there, I tried not to harm any creatures. I wasn't always successful. But one moment that sticks with me, I watched a fly that I had swatted. All of a sudden it was struggling on its back in the grass, trying to get up, trying to fly. And it reminded me of a story that I had read from Mark Nepo, the author, who tells of a man who saw a fly one day struggling on his windowsill, upside down. He describes it like this. He saw the fly there upside down on his windowsill, and he says it was struggling. And at first he was thinking, I'm just going to swat this fly while I have the chance. But then he sensed too much of his own struggle in that fly and what he was seeing. So he took a big breath, and he exhales, and his breath gives just enough wind for the fly to flip upside down and to fly away. And then he says something about how he hopes that when he's on his back and struggling and unable to find his way, that there will be enough wind to help him right himself and survive and go on. Some mysterious wind to come and help him right himself. And so today I want to talk about this idea of faith, or, do you have something that when you're on your back, flailing and struggling in your life, that you have some sense could come along and help lift you? That something, maybe someone, some force might come like the wind, like breath, and help you right yourself so that you can go on living positively in your own life. And so I want to talk about this idea of faith, especially the kind of faith that comes after doubt or in the midst of great doubt. We all hit moments in our lives when we don't know if we'll get through it. A diagnosis, a death, a divorce, a crushing debt, a secret shame, a job loss, a child's illness, an addiction, grief that won't let up, fear of fascism, fear of the future, maybe even just fear of today. Now, I don't know what you're facing, but I know this, that you're not alone. Take that in. You are not alone. Now, I've hit some spots in my life, I imagine you have, when I had no idea how I was going to get through it. There have been times when it seemed like what was happening was going to take me down. And for me to go on, it was going to be too much, too hard, way beyond my own capacity. Now, the good thing is that we're not the first people to have ever experienced such things. And that's one of the benefits of ancient stories, that they can remind us that the issues that we're dealing with and that we're confronting are often age-old issues. They're part of the human experience, and that we're not the first ones to go through it. Now, when we read these kinds of stories freely and with an open mind, and we're seeking a deeper meaning in them, beyond the literal, beyond the dogmatic, these stories can forge a connection with other people throughout time, across time and space. And so I found myself up on this mountain thinking about that story of David and Goliath. You know, if you don't know it, it's a classic story about overcoming challenge, a challenge that seems to be too difficult to tackle. So I want us to look at this story this morning. It describes the Israelite army on one side of a valley and the Philistines, who are their enemies, on the other. And it says that they're faced off and they're frozen for 40 days and 40 nights, which in this sense just means for a long, long time. And then each day, it says a 10-foot tall giant Philistine warrior named Goliath comes down into the valley and challenges the Israelites. Goliath is flanked in armor and regalia that shows that he's a decorated warrior of the highest skill and strength. And every day, he comes into the valley and he yells across to the Israelites, taunting them and asking one among them to come down and have the guts to fight him. If he's defeated, the Philistines will become their subjects. But if they lose, they will become the subjects of the Philistines. Day after day after day, the army of the Israelites stood paralyzed and in fear. This was before they had nuclear weapons and all the American-backed weapons, apparently. But then one day, along comes a small shepherd boy named David, who decides that he'll take the challenge. How does that country song go? Something about too old to know better and too young to care. That's David. Seeing his willingness, the king offers David his best armor. But when David puts it on, he says, I can barely walk in these things. How am I supposed to fight, you know? So David sheds the armor. He goes down in his street clothes, and he heads into the valley, and he challenges the most mammoth, the most decorated warrior of the Philistines, the future of his people hanging on his shoulders. But this wasn't blind faith. His was a kind of a courage that was rooted in something deeper. Of course, he wasn't certain of the outcome, couldn't be. But he had this faith that he had to try something. Sometimes we just have to do something and we don't know what's going to happen or how it's going to turn out, but we have to act anyway and hope. Because doing nothing was its own kind of death. All David has is a shepherd's sling and 5 smooth stones. I say all. Sling, back then, that was a pretty dangerous weapon. So you can just imagine, though, Goliath looking across the valley, thinking, what? Are you kidding me? You're sending this little pipsqueak in a pair of Birkenstocks to fight me? Apparently, Goliath opened the face guard on his armor, to get a closer look at the audacity of this shepherd boy coming toward him. And just then, with one precise stone and his sling, David hits Goliath right between the eyes with the stone, falls down, and he wins. Now, the stone that David carries are sometimes called the 5 smooth stones of faith. And a simplistic telling of this story usually ends with a preacher or a Sunday school teacher saying David won because he had faith in God and that God was on his side. And if you just believe hard enough, everything will work out in your life too. But that's not faith. That's fantasy. People with deep faith still die and lose. Children with praying mothers still get cancer or die in floods. Faith doesn't guarantee a happy ending. And yet, faith can give a person just enough of what they need to move forward in difficult circumstances. But as a Unitarian Universalist minister myself, people ask me, well, but what do you mean when you talk about faith? Well, one thing is, I don't see faith as the opposite of doubt. People often confuse faith with belief, but they're very much not the same thing. Belief says this is true. But faith says, even if I don't know what's true, I will keep going. Hope wants a specific outcome. I hope to live to be 100 and be healthy and have my wits about me. It's very specific. But faith is different. It says, however long I live, I have faith that I can live a life of meaning and purpose and dignity. And whatever happens, I have faith that I will not give up. Now, many of us grew up in traditions that told us exactly what to believe. And we either tried to believe it, or eventually we ran from it. Some of you ran straight into the doors of All Souls, a place where we take doubt and questions seriously. Because doubt is not the death of faith or spirituality, it's often the birthplace of it. As Brian McLaren said, I read earlier, he said, faith before doubt is just about correct belief. But faith after doubt is about revolutionary love. McLaren, who I mentioned is a progressive evangelical, he grew up with a very strict literalist faith and belief in the Bible and all that. Eventually he realized that the point of all of it was not to believe the Bible as facts, but it was to discover how the stories that are in it were teaching him how to love indiscriminately. I love that. To love in ways that goes beyond myself to my neighbor, beyond my neighbor to the stranger, beyond the stranger even to an enemy, and even beyond the human to all beings. These are the kinds of things that I find myself thinking about when I'm sitting up on a mountain with no one else to talk to. Now, you may have heard there was a pretty famous story about a minister who was up in the White Mountains, and he was on top of a big overhang, and he slipped and he began to fall over this very steep ledge, high cliff, and fortunately he managed to grab onto a branch that was just growing right out of the rock face, which was like a sheer rock face, and he was holding on for dear life. Not knowing what to do, he looked up to the heavens and he asked, is there anybody up there? And yes, of course, replied the sound of what he assumed must be God. Can you help me, please? What should I do? And he heard the voice again, and it said, what you need to do is to let go of the tree limb. So this minister, he looked down at the ground far below, and he looked up, and then he began to loosen his grip. First he loosened the left hand, and then he loosened the right hand, and he tried for a while, but he just couldn't get himself to let go. So then he looked up again. He said, is there anybody else up there who could help? Now, many of us are not easily persuaded to trust or have faith. Many people who come to All Souls grew up in another religious tradition, everything ranging from atheism or nothing to fundamentalism. And in most cases, we were given the answers and told, believe these answers. Whereas here, we offer questions. And we ask people to sit with the questions. And we teach that doubt and skepticism have an important part to play in a healthy life and a healthy spirituality. Now, it's natural that what we have faith in is going to change over the course of our lifetime. Faith in our parents, faith in our country, faith in our religious upbringing, even in ourselves. It's bound to falter. It's bound to change over the course of a life. Sometimes it's faith in a cause. We're like believing in it. And sometimes it's faith in our own ability to make a difference that can get shattered. McLaren says, doubt need not be the death of faith and spirituality. It can be instead the birth of a new kind of spirituality, a spirituality beyond beliefs, a spirituality that expresses itself in love. Now, it's sometimes said that faith is believing something I cannot see or cannot know for sure. And that is definitely a hard sell for many of us who come from a very scientific background. And yet, who among us knows the impact of our life? I have faith that no act of kindness is ever wasted. No seed planted in love is lost, whether we see the tree that grows from it or not. You know, I was thinking about all those folks who fought in World War II against the Nazis, against the Japanese, who died before the war was over. They had no idea if their choice to fight made any difference. But there was something in them that said, this is the right thing to do. I'm going to do this regardless of not knowing what will happen. I'm going to do the right thing because I have faith that doing the right thing is better than just sitting and freezing and letting the world take over on its own. I want to share you a story from the author John Ezo about a woman named Susan who used to work at a nursing home where she met another woman who also worked there. And this colleague of hers was one of those people who could never seem to keep her life together. She was always having a crisis, money troubles, losing job after job. She even developed a drug problem that she could not seem to quit. This woman was also a single mother of two beautiful twin girls. And a few times the girls were taken away from her by the county family services due to parental neglect. Now, Susan had befriended this woman when they worked together, and she stayed in touch with her after she got fired. One day, Susan got a phone call from the mother who sounded panicked. Her 7-year-old twin daughters were going to a school dance, and they had nothing to wear. And she had no money to buy them dresses. So Susan invited the woman over and said, look, let's go down to the store, we'll buy some fabric, and we'll make a couple of dresses. So Susan recounts the experience, remembering that the woman was high on something, and she could hardly keep her hands from shaking. And all the woman could do to help was just to help to pin the fabric together. But they eventually finished, and they had time to take pictures of the girls in their new green dresses. Now, a month or so later, the woman and her daughters moved away. And years passed before Susan ever saw her again. And then one day, 16 years later, Susan bumped into the woman, and she was beautifully dressed, and she looked really healthy. After a hug, Susan asked her, "Whatever happened to you and the twins?" And the woman explained that she'd gone back to school to become a nurse. And one of her girls just graduated from college, and the other one had a really good job. And she explained, "I've just become a grandmother." And then she said, "It's so great to see you because you're a large part of the reason that my life turned out the way that it did. You see, after we fell out of touch, I never lost my girls again, never lost a job again, and I got off drugs for good. She went on, do you remember that photograph we took that night of the school dance? For 10 years, I kept that photograph on my refrigerator. And every time it got tough, at work, at home, with temptations, I would just look at that photo and I'd tell myself, if you can make those green dresses, you can get through this. And every time I thought of quitting, that photograph helped me believe in myself again. Susan, if it were not for you, I don't know what would have become of my life and my girls. No act of kindness is ever wasted, even if we can't see where it goes. Our actions matter, even though we don't often see the results. And that's why I agree with Tori Merton McClure, who said, if we have faith in nothing else, we must have faith that we can improve the future. That's faith. I've seen people who have had Lou Gehrig's disease, who, at the end of their life, they couldn't move a muscle, and they had their caregivers, sometimes family members and other caregivers taking care of them, and I'm watching the compassion and the love growing in those caregivers. That person who couldn't move a muscle or even speak was still impacting the future for the good. If we have faith in nothing else, we must have faith that we can improve the future. Faith is about doing the loving thing even when we won't know how it's going to turn out. Faith is parenting. It's teaching. It's protesting. It's praying sometimes. It's planting, even when the outcome is invisible or uncertain. Faith is starting a congregation called All Souls in a living room and believing that it will matter 104 years later. I don't know what you have faith in. For some, it might be God, or it might be love, or community, or courage, or creativity. But if you have faith in nothing else, have faith that you can improve the future, that your actions matter, and that your love counts. That even if you're on your back like that fly, that there will come a wind, a breath, a spirit, maybe even a stranger who helps you to turn toward life again. That's a kind of faith worth living for. That's the kind of faith that this world needs now more than ever. I have to tell you, it is great to be back. I love you beyond belief. Go out there and live your life like it matters, and that you have an impact always on the future. No kindness is ever wasted.